I stopped waiting for my mother to love me the way she used to pretend she did. Somewhere between her sighs at the dinner table and the way she'd introduce me as just helping out with something technical, I learned that silence can bruise deeper than words. For years, I told myself it wasn't personal, that maybe I was too hard, too distant, too much of whatever made her eyes turn cold whenever I walked into a room. I thought if I stayed calm long enough, she'd see I was still her daughter. But the truth is, she did see me. She just didn't want anyone else to. The day I realized that, something in me shifted, quietly, like glass cracking under weight. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight back. I just stopped being the person they could erase without consequence. And they have no idea what that silence is about to sound like when it breaks. Monday mornings on base are always the same. Quiet, efficient, predictable. The kind of order that leaves no room for sentiment. The hum of machinery, the low whistle of the wind against the radar towers, the faint vibration through the floor when the tracking systems switch orbits. It's the closest thing I have to peace. That morning, peace came sealed in a white envelope. It sat on my desk between an operations report and a half-empty mug of coffee, its edges perfectly pressed. My name written in soft gray cursive that didn't belong here. The scent of expensive perfume hit me before I even picked it up. I didn't have to read it to know who it was from. There was only one woman who still believed that everything, including affection, should smell like something polished. Inside, silver-embossed letters curled across the paper. Mara Barker and Major Ryan Kittredge. My fingers paused on his name. For a moment, the hum of the control room faded, replaced by the roar of an engine, the smell of burning sand, the crack of static in my headset. His voice came back to me, from somewhere deep in the desert. "Ma'am, I owe you my life." Now he was marrying my sister. A note in slanted handwriting stopped my breath short. "Try not to bring work to the wedding." I almost laughed. Work, that's what she called it. Not duty, not service, just work. The thing that had kept her from introducing me to her friends. The reason she once made me park behind the house when I came home in uniform. I held the card by its corner, the silver letters catching the bluish light from the monitors. The hum of the servers filled the silence. I set it down beside my father's Air Force insignia, the same one I'd carried through every deployment since he died. He used to tell me that honor isn't about who claps for you, it's about who you are when no one's watching. I opened the window. Cold air swept in from the mountains, sharp and dry. The night sky above Peterson shimmered with the thin pulse of satellites I'd helped launch, bright dots circling a planet full of people who would never know my name. Somewhere up there, the systems I monitored kept other people safe, maybe even Ryan, maybe even my sister. Colonel Warren's reflection appeared in the glass behind me. He leaned against the doorframe, a file tucked under his arm, his expression that familiar mix of curiosity and pity. "You look like someone just sent you bad intel," he said. I didn't turn around. "Something like that." He crossed the room, the soles of his boots clicking against the tile. "Family news?" I slid the invitation toward him without a word. He read it once, then exhaled. "A Barker wedding. Didn't think you were on the guest list anymore?" "Neither did I." He looked at me carefully. "You going?" I nodded. He hesitated, then said quietly, "Family wars are tougher than the desert, Jolene." "At least in the desert," I said. "You know where the mines are." He didn't argue. He never did when I spoke like that, after he left. I stared at the envelope again, the edges already smudged with fingerprints. I thought about my mother's note, 4 words that told me everything I needed to know. She still needed control, even from 5 states away. She still needed to make sure her world stayed spotless, and that meant keeping me, my rank, my record, my existence, quiet. I opened my laptop and booked the flight to Savannah. No message to confirm I was coming, no calls to warn them. I wasn't going home to make peace. Peace had nothing to do with it. I wanted to see, just once, how far they'd gone to erase me. How neat the picture looked now that I'd been cropped out. Outside, the radar towers blinked red against the dark. Each pulse felt like a countdown. By the time the system cycled to the next orbit, I'd made my choice. If they wanted silence, I'd bring it, loud enough for everyone to hear. The night flight out of Denver cut through a sky so black it felt endless, the kind of darkness that made you question whether the world below was still there. Outside the window, thin trails of light glimmered like the satellites I used to monitor, steady, obedient, circling something that would never pull them close again. I pressed my forehead against the glass. My reflection stared back, tired, composed, faceless. Between us, the invitation lay creased on the tray table, a faint scent of perfume still clinging to it. Next to it sat a half-finished can of coffee, lukewarm and bitter. I hadn't been able to throw it away. A soft rustle beside me broke the silence. The woman in the aisle seat had the gentle accent of the South, the kind that turned vowels into honey. She was small, her hair a cloud of white curls, fingers wrapped around a rosary that glimmered with every bit of turbulence. She didn't look at me when she spoke. Family can be heavier than gravity. Dear. I smiled, just enough to be polite, and just as hard to escape. Her laugh was quick, warm, and tired all at once. Then she closed her eyes, her hand still clutching the cross, and within minutes she was asleep. I turned my gaze back to the window, where the wing lights blinked against the dark like distant signals from another life. My phone vibrated softly in my lap, lighting up with a name I hadn't seen in years. The date on the message was old enough to feel like it belonged to someone else. I still owe you my life. Hope someday I can return it, Ryan. 8 years had passed since that desert night, and yet the words felt fresh, heavy, suspended in time. I'd never replied. Maybe because I didn't know how. Back then, I believed that debts like that weren't meant to be repaid. They were meant to be buried. Gratitude could be as suffocating as guilt if you let it live too long. The engines hummed in a low, constant rhythm, a sound that reminded me of order, of control, of the illusion that nothing could reach me 30,000 feet in the air. But somewhere between Denver and Georgia, that illusion began to thin. I caught myself tracing the edge of the invitation with my thumb until the paper softened. The names shimmered in the low cabin light. Hers. His. And I wondered what kind of man marries into a family that pretends its own daughter doesn't exist. The flight attendants dimmed the cabin. Rows of sleeping strangers tilted toward each other in awkward trust. I couldn't sleep. The woman beside me murmured a prayer in her dream, a word or two about mercy. I envied her peace. My thoughts drifted the way they always did when I let my guard down. Back to the years I'd spent convincing myself I could live without them. Back to the funeral I wasn't allowed to attend. The calls that went unanswered. The birthdays that passed like blank pages. Every silence had its own weight. And somehow, the closer I got to Savannah, the heavier it felt pressing on my chest. I closed my eyes and tried to picture my sister's face as she'd looked the last time I saw her. She'd been smiling then, bright, confident, untouched by consequence. I'd wondered if she ever thought about that day, if she remembered what came before the smile. Probably not. Some people build their happiness out of forgetting. A soft chime signaled our descent. The pilot's voice was calm, detached, announcing rain and mild temperatures. I glanced out the window again, and the clouds split open to reveal the faint glow of the Georgia coast. The sea looked like melted glass, reflecting the city lights that shimmered gold and amber beneath the drizzle. Savannah. It was strange how memory could still make the air smell like salt and regret at the same time. When the plane touched down, the woman beside me stirred awake and smiled faintly. "You take care now," she said, adjusting the strap of her purse. I nodded, unsure whether she'd meant it for me or for herself. As the passengers filed out, I lingered by the exit door, watching the rain beat along the window, sliding down in straight, obedient lines. Gravity doing what it does best, pulling everything back to where it started. By the time I stepped out onto the jet bridge, the damp air hit my face. Warm and heavy, thick with that southern mix of soil, ocean, and something sweet trying too hard to hide the rot beneath. Savannah glowed under the rain, streetlights the color of honey, asphalt shining like glass, the sound of traffic humming low and steady. For a second, it felt almost welcoming. Then the wind shifted, and I remembered where I was headed. This city hadn't changed. The people in it probably hadn't either. The same charm, the same manners, the same polished lies. I walked through the terminal with my bag slung over my shoulder, the invitation folded neatly inside the front pocket, its edges pressed against my chest with every step, sharp enough to remind me that I was here for a reason. I wasn't coming home. I was orbiting back, pulled by something I'd tried for years to escape. And no matter how far I'd flown, family had always been its own kind of gravity. Savannah looked the way I remembered it, too perfect for its own good. Streets lined with moss-covered oaks, air thick with salt and magnolia, houses standing like they had secrets and money to protect. My mother's house was one of those postcard versions of Southern grace. White columns, wrought iron balcony, red bougainvillea climbing the front. It was beautiful in that curated, lifeless way. When I knocked, the smell hit first, the sharp scent of lemon polish, so strong it could strip the air of oxygen. It made my throat tighten. The floors always gleamed here, the silver spotless, the picture frames straight as soldiers. My mother didn't clean, she erased. Inside, everything was exactly where I remembered it, down to the smallest lie. The same beige rug, the same stiff sofa, the same painting of the river that had never actually hung straight, no matter how many times she measured it. But one thing stopped me cold. Above the mantel hung a framed family portrait. My father, smiling the way he used to after Sunday service. My mother, perfect posture, pearls catching the light. Mara, her hair curled just so, leaning close to them. And me, or at least the part of me that had fit into their frame once. The photo had been trimmed, the edge of my shoulder cleanly cut away. It took me a second to realize what I was seeing. Subtle, I murmured. Her voice carried from the hallway, smooth and practiced. Jolene. She appeared, back straight. Her sweater the same color as the walls, neutral, unyielding. Her pearls shone like a set of rules around her throat. You still look so official, she said. Uniform or not, I still am, I told her. A pause. She adjusted a vase that didn't need adjusting. Please don't wear it at the wedding. It's Mara's moment. I'll wear what truth fits, I said. The air between us thinned. Her eyes, pale and sharp, studied me like a stain she couldn't scrub out. She turned and gestured toward the console table, where a stack of glossy place cards was arranged in perfect order. I noticed them as soon as I stepped closer. Embossed names in gold letters. Every one of them capitalized, except one. J. Barker, Colorado. No rank, no title. Just a set of initials and a location, as if I were an out-of-town acquaintance. Someone invited out of politeness. Who's that? I asked. She smiled faintly. That same smile she used when neighbors dropped by unannounced. Oh, that's you, dear. We kept it simple. You always did. I said. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Regret, maybe, or just calculation. But it vanished quickly, replaced by that calm perfection she'd worn all my life. She smoothed her sweater, looked around the room like she was checking for witnesses, and said softly, "Don't bring up the past." I turned to go, hand on the polished doorframe that still smelled like varnish. It's already here, I told her. Outside, the sunlight spilled through the lace curtains, making everything inside look warm and golden. But the light didn't reach far. It stopped just short of where I stood, like even it knew better than to touch this place. I walked back toward the porch, my steps echoing through a silence that was too clean, too rehearsed. The air outside felt heavy, humid, but it was easier to breathe than in that house. I looked back once, through the window. She was still there, straightening something invisible, as if fixing the surface could undo what she'd done underneath. The photo over the mantel caught a glint of light. For a second, my father's eyes seemed to follow me, his half-smile frozen in time. The space where my shoulder used to be stared back. Empty, smooth, perfect. Savannah's sky was bright and cloudless, but all I could see was that missing corner of the photograph. It didn't hurt like a wound anymore. It hurt like an absence I'd gotten used to. I walked down the steps, the lemon scent clinging to my clothes. My hand brushed the banister she'd polished to a mirror sheen. It left no trace of me behind. Maybe that was how she preferred it. Still, as I reached the gate, I couldn't help but glance at the windows one more time. The house glowed gold in the afternoon sun, but to me, it looked hollow, light pretending to be warmth. I whispered under my breath. Not for her to hear, not even for me to believe. A home that forgets you isn't home. It's just a stage you used to stand on. And then I left the porch, the sound of my footsteps fading into the hum of the city. The air outside was thick, sticky with heat, but it was the first real air I'd breathed all day. Every step away from that house felt like gravity pulling the other way. The house glowed like a cathedral when I arrived, soft yellow light spilling through the curtains, the air heavy with the smell of wine and lemon polish. Inside, the dining room looked staged, every inch of it designed to impress. A white tablecloth so crisp it looked ironed into silence. Crystal glasses lined in perfect symmetry, candles reflecting off polished silver. Nothing out of place, nothing unplanned. My mother's masterpiece. Lorraine moved briskly between the chairs, her pearls swaying against a beige sweater that matched the walls. She didn't look at me when she said it. Smile when they arrive. Jolene, don't be so rigid. Habit comes with rank, I told her. Her lips tightened. The sound of disapproval, soft but practiced. She adjusted a fork that didn't need fixing, and the room fell quiet just long enough for the first knock at the door. Guests trickled in. Old friends, church acquaintances, business partners who talked more than they listened. They shook my mother's hand with reverence, greeted Mara with warmth, and turned to me with that polite confusion people wear when they don't quite know who they're supposed to be looking at. My mother's voice rose, cheerful and controlled. This is my daughter, Jolene. The words sounded more like a disclaimer than an introduction. She added, her tone light, airy, rehearsed. She works in logistics, I think. Something with satellites. A small ripple of laughter circled the table. Across from me, Mara lifted her wine glass, her smile sharp. So basically, you fix space trash, right? The laughter grew louder. I met her eyes, my voice even. That space trash kept your fiancé's jet alive. Silence. A clean, sudden cut. Only the faint ring of silverware touching porcelain. I watched her expression harden behind the glass of red wine. The way her hand trembled before she set it down. At the end of the table, a man with graying hair, General McAdams, tilted his head, squinting through the candlelight. Lieutenant Colonel Barker, isn't it? Afghanistan, Syria, Peterson Command? I opened my mouth, but my mother's voice sliced through mine. Oh, she hasn't been active for years. Civilian now. His eyes shifted from her to me, steady, calculating. He leaned back, said nothing more. The room seemed to shrink an inch smaller. Conversation picked up again, slowly, cautiously, like a broken record finding its groove. I stayed quiet, tracing the rim of my untouched glass. The waiter passed behind me and whispered, "Non-drinking guest, ma'am." My mother caught the exchange, her eyes narrowing. "It's for the best," she murmured. I lifted my water instead. The glass was clear, cold, unassuming, exactly how they liked me. My reflection trembled in it, distorted by the surface. A calm face, steady eyes, a storm underneath. Dinner dragged on, a parade of politeness. People talked about golf and real estate, vacations and summer homes. They laughed at things that weren't funny and toasted to a happiness I couldn't recognize. No one asked where I'd been the past few years. No one mentioned my name again. I could have disappeared mid-meal, and the rhythm would have gone on undisturbed. When dessert was cleared, I stood to leave. But before I could step away, my mother's hand reached out, soft and deliberate, fingers circling my wrist, her nails pressed just hard enough to warn, "Don't ruin this for Mara, not again." I turned slowly. What did I ruin? "Mom?" Her eyes flickered, her voice lowering to a whisper too sharp to be mistaken for regret. "Your father's funeral." The words hit like shrapnel. I felt every eye at the table flick toward us, pretending not to. The air thinned. "No," I said, my voice low. "You did. When you canceled my leave." Her hand went slack, the color draining from her face. Around us, the laughter returned, soft, nervous, as if the guests needed noise to drown the silence that had just split the room open. I stepped back, her grip falling away completely. The candle nearest us wavered in its glass holder, the flame bending but not breaking. At the doorway, I looked back once. Mara was leaning close to her fiancé, whispering something, her expression tight, her smile forced. My mother's hand trembled as she lifted her glass, though she still managed to nod gracefully at whatever story someone was telling. The mask never slipped. I walked out into the hallway. The smell of lemon polish clung to me, sharp and suffocating. Every step away from that table felt like peeling something off my skin. Outside, the night air was damp, thick with the scent of the river and rain-soaked jasmine. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing it in. The laughter carried faintly through the door behind me, muffled and distant, as if it belonged to another world. There's a particular kind of cruelty in being invisible at your own family's table, the kind that doesn't bruise, just corrodes. I straightened my shoulders out of habit, then let them drop. For once, I didn't want to look composed. I just wanted to feel something honest. The windows glowed behind me, golden and soft, but the light stopped just short of where I stood. It always had. I turned toward the quiet street, the sound of cicadas filling the space where my mother's voice used to be, and as I walked down the steps, I realized something I hadn't before. She didn't build that house to keep us together. She built it to keep control. The air outside was warm, heavy, but it was the first breath all night that didn't hurt going down. The morning of the wedding came with that deceptive kind of beauty Savannah does so well, sunlight sharp as glass, air sweet with salt and flowers. The city sounded almost gentle, like it had decided to hold its breath for the occasion. By the time I reached St. Paul's, the white roses had already begun to wilt in the heat, though no one seemed to notice. The church looked like something out of a magazine. Arches washed in gold light, ribbons of white draped over every pew, a choir humming softly as guests filled the aisles. It was the kind of beauty that doesn't invite you in. It warns you to behave. My name tag waited for me on a side table near the door. J. Barker, Colorado. Small, plain, printed in a font that looked like it was trying not to take up space. I pinned it on, feeling the sharp point of the metal catch my skin. Around me, people greeted one another like they'd all been born into the same air. My mother floated through the crowd, graceful, poised, a pearl among magnolias. She leaned close to one of her friends, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. It means so much to have family here. Everyone that matters is here. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I just let the words settle, heavy and familiar, like a coat I'd worn for years. When the music started, I slipped into the last pew, the one near the emergency exit. It was the same place I'd stood years ago at my father's funeral, when she decided a uniform might distract from the moment. The church smelled the same too, flowers and polish, faint incense, and something underneath it all that smelled like grief pretending to be decorum. The organ swelled. Guests rose. Mara appeared at the doors, framed in light, her white gown moving like a slow tide. Every head turned toward her, every camera flash chasing the illusion of a perfect day. I stayed seated. My mother caught sight of me from across the aisle. Her look was soft, warning. I lowered my gaze to my hands, folded tightly in my lap. The priest's voice filled the church, calm, practiced, unshakable. If there's anyone who believes these two should not be joined. For half a second, I thought I felt every breath in the room pause. My eyes drifted to Ryan. He stood tall, steady, his shoulders squared the same way they had been that night in Syria, just before the explosion. I remembered the dust, the roar, the way he'd turned, shouting for help through the static. I remembered dragging him out, half-conscious, the sound of his voice cracked and weak. "Ma'am, I owe you my life!" And now here he was, in polished shoes and a pressed suit, standing at the altar with my sister. That's reason enough, I thought, but I said nothing. The vows came and went in a blur of rehearsed affection. Hands clasped, rings exchanged, lips met. Applause followed. Perfect. My mother's favorite word. When the ceremony ended, the guests spilled into the sunlight like a tide breaking through stained glass. I waited until the crowd thinned before standing, the heat pressing against my skin, perfume and roses colliding in the air. Outside, the steps gleamed white, almost blinding. Mara posed for photos, her smile brilliant and weightless, her laughter bright enough to make people forget that perfection always comes at a cost. My mother hovered nearby, adjusting her hair, smoothing imaginary wrinkles, satisfied that everything had gone according to plan. I stood at the edge of it all, invisible, just as she preferred. Then Ryan turned. Our eyes met across the crowd, and for a moment, everything stilled. The chatter, the clicking cameras, even the breeze that played with her veil. He hesitated, his jaw tightening, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. He nodded once, barely perceptible. His lips moved, soundless, but I knew the word, ma'am. It wasn't loud, not even meant for anyone else, but I heard it, and it landed like a heartbeat I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Mara turned, looped her arm through his, her laughter cutting clean through the air. She pulled him back into the center of the celebration, radiant in her victory, radiant in her ignorance. My mother caught my eye then, her expression calm, approving. She tilted her chin slightly, as if to say, "See? This is how things are supposed to look." I smiled. Not out of agreement, but because I finally understood. Every perfect thing she built had cracks beneath it. Every word she said to keep the world in order only proved how close it was to collapsing. I took a step back, letting the noise of the crowd swallow me, the flash of cameras lighting the church steps like small explosions. Let's see how long perfection lasts, I thought. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of roses and champagne down the street. I walked toward it, away from the sound of applause, the church bells echoing behind me like a warning. For everyone else, it was a wedding. For me, it was the start of a countdown. The ballroom at the River Street Hotel glowed like an old Southern postcard, crystal chandeliers throwing light across ivory walls, ribbons tied in perfect symmetry, soft piano notes sliding under the hum of conversation. The air was sweet with vanilla candles and the sharp bite of expensive champagne. Every detail screamed of perfection, but perfection always comes with a price. I sat at table 12, near the double doors, where the servers moved in and out with trays. The seats closer to the stage had names printed in bold letters, full titles gleaming in gold. Mine read Ms. J. Barker, Colorado, small, gray font. Easy to miss. I let my fingers rest against the edge of the place card, feeling the imprint of my own name, like a bruise that had faded but never healed. Around me, the laughter rose and fell like waves. The chandeliers shimmered, glasses clinked, and I could almost mistake it all for celebration. Almost. Because I knew better. This wasn't a party, it was a battlefield disguised in lace and linen. Then Mara stepped onto the small stage, microphone in hand. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent her life being admired. Her smile sparkled under the light. Her voice was honey and razor blades. "Tonight," she began, "I want to thank my beautiful family, especially my big sister, for finally showing up to a family event." The room chuckled. She waited for the laughter to settle, then leaned closer to the mic. "She's done such important work in... what is it again? Space logistics? We like to call her our family's astronaut janitor." The laughter burst louder this time, rich and confident. Even my mother smiled, tilting her head toward a neighbor, her pearls catching the light. I lifted my glass of water. The condensation left a small ring on the white tablecloth. I didn't drink. I just held it there, watching the reflection of the chandelier tremble inside. Across the room, Ryan stood beside Mara, his face unreadable. He laughed once, late, forced, and then stopped. His eyes dropped to the floor. Both his hands were clenched around his glass. Mara continued, the sweetness in her tone tightening like wire. "Some people," she said, "never really land back to Earth. But that's okay. Not everyone's meant to have a real life." The laughter this time stumbled. A few people glanced at me, then quickly looked away. I could feel the room shifting, the kind of discomfort that spreads when cruelty starts to sound too real. And then I heard it. A sharp, deliberate sound, Ryan's glass hitting the table. Chick! It cut through the chatter like a command. The music stopped mid-note. He stepped forward, slow but certain, the crowd parting instinctively. He turned to face me, his shoulders squared, his spine straightened. I knew that posture. I'd seen it 100 times before, in deserts, under gunfire, in the silence before a mission. He spoke clearly, voice steady, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Colonel Jolene Barker, my commanding officer in Syria. She didn't just serve, she saved my life." Time stopped. No one moved. The pianist's hands hovered above the keys, frozen, The microphone slipped from Mara's grip, hitting the floor with a metallic crash that echoed through the room. And then, across the ballroom, General McAdams stood. His chair scraped the floor with purpose. He brought his hand to his brow in a perfect salute. Another officer rose beside him, then another, then two more, one by one. Men and women in uniform and formal dress followed, the sound of their shoes against the floor sinking like a heartbeat. A forest of salutes filled the air. I didn't breathe. My pulse roared in my ears. Mara stumbled backward, her face drained of color. Someone reached out to steady her, but she swayed, her knees giving way. The satin of her gown pooled around her as she crumpled to the floor. My mother stood suddenly, the movement knocking her wine glass over. Red spilled across the white tablecloth, spreading fast, a dark stain blooming like blood. She didn't try to stop it. She just stared. Ryan remained at attention, arm raised, voice quiet but resolute. With all due respect. Ma'am. The room was utterly still, save for the quiet rustle of candle flames and the faint hum of the air conditioner. I rose slowly. My throat felt tight, but my voice came out steady. At ease. Major. He lowered his hand. Around the room. The salutes followed, every movement synchronized, precise. I caught sight of the American flag draped near the stage. The chandelier light caught on it, throwing a line of silver across my shoulder. For a long moment, no one dared to move. Then someone began to clap, a hesitant sound that multiplied, spreading like a ripple. Applause filled the air, awkward at first, then growing louder, stronger, until it was deafening. I raised my hand, palm outward. The sound faltered, then died. No need, I said quietly. Tonight's not about me. It's about truth showing up where it wasn't invited. A hush settled again. The servers stood motionless near the walls. The pianist sat frozen, staring down at the keys. Somewhere behind me, a young waitress whispered, almost to herself, "Ma'am." I think that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. I didn't turn around. My eyes swept the room, the gleam of silver, the red stains spreading wider on the tablecloth, the faces that couldn't meet my gaze. Every mask had slipped, every layer of pretense stripped away by something they hadn't expected. Respect. Mara was being helped to her feet, her expression dazed, her veil tangled. My mother stood beside her, trembling, her hands stained pink from the wine she'd tried too late to stop. Ryan looked at me once more. There was no triumph in his face, only a quiet understanding, a debt finally settled. The chandeliers above us flickered, light shifting from gold to silver, warm to cold. The room had changed, everything had. I placed my glass down, leaving behind a small ring of water on the tablecloth, clear, simple, and unmissable. Then I turned toward the doors and walked out. The music didn't start again. No one dared. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. The city lights shimmered across the river, and the wind lifted my hair as I stepped into the quiet. For years, they'd kept me invisible. Tonight, I didn't need to be seen. I only needed to be remembered. By morning, the world had already decided what last night meant. The headlines were everywhere, on phone screens, TV tickers, news apps, social media feeds. Air Force officer honored at sister's wedding. Room fell silent. The video clip of Ryan's salute looped endlessly. The way he stood straight. The way I nodded back. The stunned faces frozen mid-applause. Every platform had it. The comments scrolled faster than I could read them. That salute changed everything. Finally, someone showed that family what honor looks like. She didn't even need to speak. Power doesn't have to shout. I watched them all from the small hotel armchair, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. My phone buzzed constantly on the table, calls from journalists, messages from old friends, even a few from former commanders. I didn't open a single one, but there was nothing from my mother, nothing from Mara. The silence from them was louder than the applause that had filled that ballroom. A knock came at the door, sharp, deliberate. I didn't have to look to know who it was. My mother never called ahead. She appeared, as if her presence alone was supposed to make sense of things. When I opened the door, she stood there stiffly, her hair pinned too tight, lipstick faded, a thin line of exhaustion around her eyes. For the first time, she looked smaller than I remembered. "You humiliated your sister," she said. I set my cup down and looked at her. I didn't say a word. She took a step forward, Everyone's talking about us. They're finally saying our names right. I answered. Her breath caught, and for a second, she looked like she might cry. But she didn't. She never did. She reached for the back of a chair, gripping it like it might keep her steady. You've destroyed the family's reputation. I opened my laptop and pulled up an old email. It took only a few clicks to find it. The denial order stamped 8 years ago. The reason I hadn't been allowed to come home for my father's funeral? I turned the screen toward her. You already did, I said quietly. Her face drained of color. She stared at the screen. The way the signature glowed at the bottom. L. Barker. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. I thought I was protecting you. No, you were protecting your reflection. The words landed between us like glass breaking. For a moment, I thought she might try to argue, defend herself, rebuild whatever story she'd told herself to survive. But she didn't. She just stood there, staring, her knuckles white around the chair. Finally, she turned to leave. Her hand reached the door, but she stopped, still facing away. Your father would have wanted peace, she said. I stood, closing the laptop with a quiet click. He raised a soldier, not a statue. She didn't respond. The door closed behind her softly, but the silence she left behind felt like a weight pressing into the air. The afternoon sun burned low over the river when the next knock came, softer this time. I hesitated before opening it. Mara stood there, barefoot, hair unbrushed, wearing a white dressing gown that still carried the faint shimmer of her wedding fabric. Her eyes were swollen, the kind of red that doesn't come from tears alone, but from exhaustion and regret. I didn't know Mom did that. She said. I studied her for a long moment. This was the same woman who'd smiled so bright under chandeliers, the same one who'd let the laughter roll at my expense, but the sharp edges were gone now. All that remained was the fragile shape underneath. You didn't have to know, I said. You played your part. Her shoulders slumped. She pressed her fingers to her temple, as if holding in something breaking. I just wanted her to love me the way she loved you. I almost laughed, but it wasn't that kind of moment. I looked at her, steady and calm. Then you should have stood where I stood. It's cold there. She didn't speak again. A faint sound came from the hallway behind her. Footsteps, steady and familiar. Ryan appeared in the doorway, no longer in uniform, just a simple white shirt and dark trousers. He looked tired but unafraid. In his hand, he held the bridal bouquet, its flowers drooping, petals browned at the edges. He must have picked it up from wherever it had fallen the night before. He held it out for a moment, then set it down on the small table by the door. The salute, he said, his voice quiet, was long overdue. I watched him for a moment, then smiled faintly. You just cleared your debt? Major? He nodded, a trace of something like peace crossing his face. For a second, none of us spoke. The air between us wasn't bitter anymore, just tired, heavy, real. Mara turned toward him, her eyes searching his, but he didn't meet her gaze. She looked back at me instead. There was something there I hadn't seen before, understanding, maybe even shame. I walked to the window and looked down at the street below. The city was moving again, as if last night had never happened. Cars passed, people laughed, life went on, but nothing was the same. Not for us, not anymore. Behind me, I heard the soft rustle of fabric, Mara's gown shifting as she turned toward the door. Ryan followed her, his steps slow. Neither said goodbye. When the door closed, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The bouquet sat forgotten on the table, a few petals already fallen. I picked one up, rubbed it between my fingers until it crumbled. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of traffic below. My phone buzzed again. Another notification, another headline, another stranger deciding what my story meant. I didn't open it. Instead, I turned off the light, sat in the fading sun, and let the silence fill the space they'd left behind. Outside, the world kept talking. Inside, for the first time in years, I didn't have to. The rain had been falling since dawn, thin and steady, the kind that blurred the world without washing anything away. Savannah was gray that morning, the streets slick with mist, the air heavy with the faint sweetness of magnolia and wet asphalt. I sat by the window of my hotel room, watching the water bead and slide down the glass, listening to the steady rhythm against the pane. The scent of lavender from a small vase on the table mixed with the stale bitterness of coffee gone cold. My uniform hung on the back of a chair, sharp creases still perfect from the night before. On the laptop screen, the news moved faster than I could keep up. The salute that silenced a room. My face stared back from dozens of angles, captured mid-nod, mid-breath, mid-meaning. The world was talking about me. My own family still wasn't. A soft sound broke through the hum of rain. The door opening. Not a knock, not an announcement, just the quiet, deliberate turn of the handle. My mother stood there, rain dripping from the tips of her umbrella. The color had drained from her face. Her lipstick was gone. The pearls that had once been part of her uniform of control left behind somewhere. Without them, she looked human, smaller, uncertain. She closed the door and walked in slowly. The room smelled faintly of rain and cold air as she sat down across from me. For a long time, neither of us said anything. "You've embarrassed us," she said at last. "Us or you?" I asked. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the umbrella before she set it down beside her chair. "Your sister's broken. The world's talking about us. Finally, for something true." She exhaled sharply, her composure cracking for just a second. The hand she lifted to her cup shook. The coffee sloshed and spilled over, dripping onto the table and down to the carpet, each drop landing with a soft, rhythmic sound, steady as a metronome. "You think truth heals everything?" "No," I said. "But lies rot what's left." For a moment, the only sound was the rain against the window and the faint ticking of the coffee dripping to the floor. She stared at the mess she'd made as if realizing it couldn't be wiped away. I reached for my laptop and opened it, turning the screen toward her. The light flickered across her face, catching every new line, every decade of pretense. I scrolled until the email appeared, the one I had carried like a scar. Request denied. Family prefers ceremony remain private. Signed, L. Barker. Her hand rose to her mouth. I thought, "I was protecting you from their judgment," she said, her voice barely audible. "You were protecting yourself from mine." Her eyes shut, her shoulders folding slightly, as though she'd been hit. "I didn't know how to protect you without erasing you," she whispered. "Then you didn't protect me," I said softly. "You erased a daughter." The room stilled. Even the rain seemed to quiet. Her tears came slowly, soundlessly, the kind that left her gasping between breaths. I'd imagined her crying before, but not like this. These weren't performative tears, the ones she shed when neighbors brought casseroles or when she needed sympathy at church. This was something raw, something real. For years, she'd built herself from glass and manners, and now she sat across from me, cracking at the seams. When she finally spoke again, her voice was small. "What do I do now?" I turned toward the window. The rain was lighter now, fading into mist. Beyond the glass, the city glowed pale under the clearing sky. "Remember," I said. She followed my gaze, her eyes unfocused, like she was seeing the world for the first time in years. Her breathing steadied, but she didn't answer. She reached for the cup again, and then stopped halfway, realizing it was pointless. The surface of the coffee had already gone cold and still. She stood slowly, the weight of years seeming to press on her shoulders. The umbrella slipped from her grasp and landed against the floor with a soft thud, a few droplets splattering across the carpet. She didn't notice. She took one last look at me, wordless, unguarded, and walked to the door. Her hand lingered on the knob, fingers trembling. She didn't turn around. Then she left. The door closed quietly, and the silence that followed filled every inch of the room. The umbrella lay where she'd dropped it, water dripping from its edge, each drop finding the same spot on the floor until a small dark circle spread wider and wider. I sat still, watching it. On the table, her coffee sat untouched. In the reflection of the surface, I saw two faces for a fleeting moment, hers and mine. Same jawline, same eyes. One woman who used silence to hide, another who used it to reveal. We were different versions of the same story. I pulled my father's old notebook from my bag. The leather cover was cracked, the pages soft and yellowed. He'd kept it in his flight jacket, filled with quick notes, coordinates, and quotes. I flipped through until I reached the back page. In his careful handwriting were the words I'd forgotten until now. You can't lead by silence unless you've earned it. I traced the letters with my thumb. They were faint, but they held. My father had never said much, but everything he did had meant something. He'd led without noise, without spectacle, something my mother had never learned, something I was still learning. I looked back toward the window. The sky had started to clear. Sunlight broke through the clouds, thin and hesitant, catching the last of the rain as it fell. The city outside shimmered, wet streets glowing gold, rooftops glistening under the pale light. It wasn't warmth yet, but it was promise. I stood, picked up the umbrella, and placed it upright beside the door. It leaned slightly, still dripping, but stable. "You didn't fail me," I said quietly. "You taught me how to stand." The words weren't meant for her to hear. They weren't even meant to forgive. They were just true. The room felt lighter. The lavender scent lingered, faint but steady. I poured out the cold coffee and rinsed the cup. The stain it left on the table was shaped like a ring, small, imperfect, and lasting. I set the notebook beside it. The ink on my father's words had smudged slightly under my fingers, darkening them like ash. Outside, the last of the rain slowed to a stop. The city moved on, as it always did. Cars rolled by. A horn sounded. Somewhere, a church bell struck 11. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. I sat back by the window and watched the world return to motion. The clouds had thinned enough for a strip of blue to show through. Faint but visible. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that was enough. 3 months later, the city of Washington, D.C. gleamed under a winter sun, crisp and clear, the kind of morning that felt too bright to hold sorrow. The National Air Force recognition ceremony filled the Grand Hall at the Capitol complex. A sea of blue uniforms, silver pins, and polished shoes reflecting light from the flag-lined walls. From the stage, the room stretched wide, solemn, and silent except for the quiet hum of anticipation. Rows of soldiers sat upright, their families behind them, wives, husbands, children clutching small flags. Their faces lifted toward the podium. My palms were dry, my posture straight. It had been months since the wedding, but the echo of that salute still followed me. It lived in the pause before people spoke my name, in the way they looked at me longer than they used to, as if trying to understand something unspoken. When the ceremony began, familiar names were called, medals were pinned, applause swelled, brief and dignified. Then the host stepped forward, voice echoing through the microphone. "Our next speaker," he announced, "has served in multiple overseas operations and continues to represent the quiet strength of those who lead without expectation. Lieutenant Colonel Jolene Barker." The lights shifted. I rose, the weight of the uniform settling against my shoulders like second skin. The microphone waited under the warm glow, a single white spotlight spilling over the lectern. As I walked up the steps, I caught sight of a familiar face in the front rows, Colonel Warren, seated near the aisle. He gave a small nod, the kind that said everything without words. Beside him, almost hidden in the second row, sat my mother and sister. Lorraine's hands were folded neatly in her lap, her pearls absent, her hair tied back simply. Mara sat beside her. No jewelry, no bright colors, just a pale dress and eyes that wouldn't quite lift. They looked smaller than I remembered, not diminished, just human. I reached the podium, unfolded the sheet of paper I'd written weeks ago. The edges were worn from travel, the ink slightly faded. I'd spent nights trying to find the right words, but words had never felt enough. Now, under the heat of the stage lights, I saw that the last page, the one that carried my closing lines, was smudged with water. The ink blurred into unreadable streaks. I didn't bother to fix it. I didn't need the paper anymore. I looked up at the sea of faces, the flags swaying faintly behind them, and began to speak. "We fight wars overseas," I said, my voice low but clear. "But many of us survive different ones, wars that happen at home, in living rooms, at dinner tables, under our own last names." The hall fell utterly still. Some of us lose battles to silence. Some learn to command it. I paused, my fingers resting lightly on the lectern. The microphone trembled just enough to send a faint hum through the speakers, a heartbeat against the quiet. Family doesn't always understand service, I continued, and that's okay. Because service, like love, doesn't demand applause, only truth. For a long second, the silence in the room became something tangible. I let it stretch, fill the air, let it mean what it needed to mean. The light softened to gold as I spoke my final words. Silence isn't surrender, it's command. I stepped back, letting the stillness breathe. Then, somewhere in the back, a hand began to clap. It wasn't loud, it wasn't rushed, it was steady. Then another, and another, until the sound filled the entire hall, not like thunder, but like rain, measured, respectful, certain. I didn't bow, I just nodded once, letting the weight of the moment pass through me, grounding me to the floor. From the stage, I could see my mother wipe at her cheek. Not a dramatic gesture, just one quick, quiet motion, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to cry here. Mara's head was bowed. Her hands clasped so tight, her knuckles had gone white. For the first time, I didn't feel anger looking at them, only distance. And then, slowly, a kind of release. When the applause faded, I stepped down from the stage. The air felt lighter now, the kind that follows a storm. Colonel Warren met me halfway down the aisle, his expression proud but restrained, like every commander who knows emotion is better left unspoken. Good speech, his nod said. I returned it with the same unspoken gratitude. As I turned to leave, my mother stood. She made her way toward me, her steps uncertain, her hands clutching something small. A white envelope, slightly wrinkled at the corners. Your father would be proud, she said quietly. I looked at her, really looked at her. The lines around her mouth were deeper, her eyes softer. Maybe for the first time, she meant it. Then maybe now, I finally can be. I replied. She held my gaze for a long moment, then placed the envelope in my hand. Her fingers were cool against mine, her grip trembling before she let go. I didn't open it. I tucked it into the inside pocket of my uniform, just above my heart, where the weight of it rested gently. An old wound finally carried right. When I stepped outside, the air was sharp and cold. The sun was just beginning to sink behind the buildings, the flag above the Capitol snapping in the wind. The sound of the crowd still echoed faintly behind me, a low murmur of voices, laughter, and something that felt like peace. I walked down the marble steps slowly, each one catching the dying light, my reflection glimmering faintly in the polished stone. The city moved on around me, traffic honking, footsteps crossing the plaza. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running parallel to the world. I was part of it. When I reached the bottom, I paused, looking out toward the horizon. The sky had turned a soft shade of white gold, the kind of light that makes everything, flags, faces, memories, look gentler than they really are. Somewhere inside my jacket, the paper crinkled softly against my heartbeat. Not all wars end with a ceasefire. Some end when someone finally stands still. And for the first time, I did. A year had passed since the day the room fell silent. Winter came softly to Montana, the kind of quiet cold that felt earned. The plains stretched out for miles, a white canvas broken only by the thin line of an airstrip carved through the snow. The air smelled of frost and jet fuel, faint and clean, like the memory of something that used to hurt but no longer did. No one was there to meet me, no ceremony, no audience. Just the wind and the whisper of my boots crunching across the frozen ground. I preferred it that way. The old hangar looked smaller than I remembered. Its wooden frame creaked against the wind. The corrugated panels rusted in spots, but still holding strong. I ran my gloved hand along the side door, cold metal biting at my fingertips, and pushed it open. The hinges groaned in greeting. Inside, dust hung in the air like a memory. And there it was. My father's plane. The Piper Cherokee, paint faded, propeller dull from years of disuse. The word Lark still faintly painted under the cockpit window. The nickname he'd given both the plane and me. I walked closer, the sound of my boots echoing softly across the concrete floor. I rested my palm on the metal fuselage. It was colder than I expected, but solid, unmoving, loyal. My reflection looked back at me in the dull sheen, blurred but whole, sliding into the pilot's seat. I exhaled. The leather creaked under my weight. Familiar and forgiving. The same seat where my father once sat beside me, guiding my hands on the yoke, teaching me how to trust the wind, how to trust myself. For a long time, I just sat there, breathing. The silence here was different, thicker, deeper. It wasn't the heavy kind that used to haunt me at family dinners or fill the spaces between my mother's carefully chosen words. This silence was clean. I pulled the old flight bag from under the seat. Inside was his ring, the military band he'd worn every day until the end. I turned it in my hand, the gold dulled but still warm somehow. "You can rest now?" "Dad," I whispered. I set the ring gently on the co-pilot's seat, the metal glinting faintly in the dim light. For once, it didn't feel like something I was carrying. It felt like something I was returning. Outside, the wind shifted, snow swirled across the runway like a living thing. I flipped the master switch, and the cabin hummed to life. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared awake, the sound slicing through the stillness like a heartbeat restarting after too long. The propeller spun, scattering snow in a shining arc. As the plane rolled forward, the tires hissed over the ice. I steered toward the open stretch ahead, my hands steady, my breath calm. The wings caught the morning light, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless before I'd even left the ground. The Cherokee lifted easily, the field shrinking below into a sheet of white. The horizon opened wide, endless and forgiving. Beneath me, the shadow of the plane stretched long and narrow across the snow until it disappeared into light. I leveled out. The sky, a pale gray streaked with gold. The sun broke through the clouds, pouring over the windshield, painting everything in that same white-gold glow I remembered from the ballroom. The light that once felt artificial, staged. Now it was real, pure. It didn't burn. It warmed. For a long time, I didn't think. I just flew. The sound of the engine, the whistle of air past the wings, the pulse of the controls beneath my fingertips, it was all rhythm, all certainty. When the world below became nothing but distance and haze, I reached for the worn leather notebook on the passenger seat. My father's, once. Now mine. The pages were soft, edges frayed from years of travel. I flipped to the last one, the only one still blank. I clicked the pen and wrote slowly, each word deliberate, a final line to close everything that came before it. I was never missing from the family. They just stopped looking. The ink dried quick and dark. I closed the book and set it next to the ring. Outside, the wind picked up, sharp and cold. The sun climbed higher, slicing through the clouds. I tilted the plane slightly, banking toward the light. The sky ahead stretched open, no barriers, no borders, just the horizon calling softly. For the first time in my life, there was nothing left to prove. No more names to correct, no expectations to meet, no ghosts left to outrun, only the quiet hum of the engine and the steady beat of my own pulse, matching its rhythm. The world below blurred into white and gold. I smiled, just barely, feeling the corners of my mouth lift the way they hadn't in years. No applause, no cameras, no one to witness it. Just freedom, clean, quiet, and real. I reached over, resting my fingers lightly on the ring beside me. The sunlight caught on its edge, a single glint of gold flashing against the window before fading. "You can rest now?" I repeated softly, though this time I wasn't talking to him. The Cherokee climbed higher, steady as breath, until the ground was just a blur of snow and memory. I let the silence stretch around me, vast and unbroken. It didn't ache anymore. It felt earned. The sky opened wider, the sun burned brighter, and for the first time since everything began, I wasn't returning to anything. I was finally leaving.